To start off with, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. So today we're very, very lucky. We have the wonderful Dr. Ruth Luscombe with us today. And Ruth is going to share some of her journey on where she has come from to get to here today, and then we will keep working through some questions. So please use the chat, make sure that you ask any questions, but we will have question time at the end. So, you know, let's open up at the back end as well. So just as a matter of introduction, so Ruth is a mathematician and a data scientist specializing in operations research, machine learning and statistics. She holds a doctorate in mathematics for her research on dynamic resource allocation. She has nearly 20 years of project management, machine learning, programming, and solution development experience in the health, education, and private sectors. At Fireball, where she currently is, she leads a development team building an early bushfire notification platform that uses deep learning to detect fires within minutes of ignition. So pretty impressive. And, you know, I've had the privilege of speaking with Ruth in the past, and I find her extremely engaging. And if you don't get a humour, don't worry, you will in a couple of days. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Ruth, and thank you to take on your presentation.
Thanks so much for the introduction. Thank you to the AI Hub for hosting this series. And good afternoon, everyone. I can't see the other attendees, so it's always, I'm used to giving presentations where I can see people, so it's a little bit, it's less fun right now, isn't it? So let me share my screen and go through a little bit of a lunchtime chat. So as Rowan said, I currently work for Fireball, where I'm leading an amazing team, and like every day when something looks like it's about to go sideways, I'm always grateful for the, like, just some of the brilliant people around me who just accomplish amazing things and get the job done. Yeah, even this morning there was something, we have a whole team in the US, and it was something that looked like it went sideways overnight, and actually when my DevOps guy addressed it this morning, it was like there was no outage. It was a user error by one of our guys in the US. So that was a relief. But let me start by telling you how I got here, because when I finished high school, I was good at French and maths, and I pretty much ignored everything else. And it is not immediately obvious what you do with yourself if you're good at French and maths. So I immediately took 2 gap years, and then eventually ended up, when I went to university, I ended up doing mathematics and computer science because they seemed really cool. And though it still wasn't immediately obvious what that would turn into as a career, it did seem like applied mathematics and programming were definitely going to be things that were useful in the future. So I finished my degree. Like most people who grew up in Adelaide, I moved to Melbourne when I finished my degree. And I spent a few years there trying to find out what a mathematician was going to do. And I wandered off into accounting, which wasn't for me because it wasn't mathy enough. So around 2010, I started looking for a mathy job. And it turned out that Queensland Health was looking for an analyst to come up to the Sunshine Coast for a 6-month project. And because it was interesting sounding work, and it was only 6 months, I figured that if it didn't work out, after 6 months, I could go back to Melbourne. Because as anyone who's lived in Melbourne knows, that while you live in Melbourne, you think it's the center of the universe. So I figured if it wasn't great in Queensland, that I would just go back to Melbourne. And 10 years later, I can confidently say I didn't go back. I've had such a good time. So the 6-month contract with Queensland Health was looking at length of stay and waiting times in emergency departments. And I learnt so much about medicine in the tea room of the emergency department at Nambour Hospital that now I have a doctorate in mathematics. My little joke about being a doctor is that everything I learned about medicine was in the tea room of the emergency department. Anyway, so I'd spent 6 months there. I got extended out to about 2 years. And my boss at the hospital said, we can probably keep finding you projects, but we probably can't find a permanent job at this level for a mathematician. However, if you want to go to university and do some project related to the hospital, some analytics project or scheduling project, then they could support that academically and financially. So in 2012, I went back to uni. I don't know if you guys have been to the QUT Gardens Point campus, but that new building, well, it was brand new when I got there, and I got to sit at a workstation up on the 7th floor overlooking the Goodwill Bridge, which was a beautiful view and far above my station in life at that time, but kept me distracted when the research was really hard. But after nearly 4 years, I graduated with a PhD. So what does one do with a PhD in applied mathematics? Well, I went back to the hospital and did some more analytics work there. So the research that I'd done and the field that I come from, we do a lot of scheduling work. So the research project was around how would you schedule emergency department patients into beds, and then how do you schedule doctors and nurses and treatments for those patients, given that you don't know who they are before they get there. So this is why it's a dynamic resource allocation problem. But when I got back to the hospital, I was working more in rostering. And then after I left the hospital, I think I spent another year there. After I left the hospital, I spent some time with some other local businesses doing other interesting related problems around, well, what I think of as applied mathematics, but it turns out it's also now called data science. So at the end of 2017, I went to Bali for a couple of months. So it's my self-imposed sabbatical. And what I did in Bali was I did some of those Coursera courses on deep learning. And I realized that under the hood, all of this data science, machine learning stuff, it is literally statistics, calculus, and linear algebra, which is what I'd already spent my entire tertiary education and my entire math career so far working on. So then I came out of, well, when I came back from Bali, it was data science roles that I started looking for, because as I said at the beginning of this journey, it wasn't immediately obvious what jobs a mathematician would take, because people don't really put mathematician in their job description. They sometimes put statistician, but now they're putting data scientist. So that made it really easy with this sort of background and these sort of qualifications to know what I was looking for. And at the beginning of this year, I started working for Fireball. Immediately prior to Fireball, I'd been working for a US company. And a funny thing happened, well, funny for me, around Christmas time, I went to a Christmas party for the Pregen Digital Hub where I sit today. And I was telling everyone there that I was about to move to Colorado because the company that I'd been working for, the American company, had asked me to go and ship myself off to Colorado, and it sounded really cool. But then I met the CEO and the COO of Fireball at this Christmas party, and they said, you know what? We have a job that you could have here. And so that was the choice that I made. And given how this year turned out, I'm so glad I stayed. All right, so now I do early bushfire detection. We use a combination of optical and satellite sensing. And we look for, well, with satellites, you look for hotspots. And with optical sensors, you look for smoke. And so this is where the machine learning comes in. So we focus at the moment primarily on looking, on computer vision algorithms that look for smoke in photos. And the product that we're building out is a there's a map UI. I'll show you some screenshots in a minute. There's a map that you can log into through a web browser, and it shows you where the fires are, and you can view the images from the cameras. And you can also subscribe to notifications when fires come up. And the whole point of the system is that in a country like Australia, depending on how remote you are, it can take half an hour to an hour before a proper assessment of a fire is done. Because someone has to drive past and call it in. The call goes down to some distribution center. They call a local fire department who send out a single unit. And so a lot of time has passed until someone from the local fire brigade can get some eyes on that fire. And it's those early minutes that are critical. And so we took this project, when I came on board in February and built out a team, there was a working research prototype that had been developed by some collaborators that we have in California. And we had to take that from a working prototype for a small set of cameras and make it into something scalable that we can roll out to different customers in different states and different countries on a massive scale. So at the moment, I think we try and process, I think nearly 5 million camera images a day. And the prototype that we inherited was, I think, somewhere down in the low thousands. And just a fun note here, the photo that I have on this slide is actually the pre-gen fires that happened just before Christmas. The photo is taken from one of the balconies of the building where I currently live. So that's how close it is, and that's how meaningful this problem is. So it's really exciting to be working on something so close to home. But this is what the detections look like. So on the left, we have that little tiny yellow dot in the middle inside the red circle. So this is a satellite image from the Himawari 8 satellite. And it comes in different bands. I'm by no means an expert on remote sensing. But this is super useful because if you get your satellite data early enough and a high enough frequency, you can see hotspots like this. And we combine it with, as I said, the optical sensors. So on the right, we have a couple of camera shots from, I think they're from California. Yeah, they're both from California. So the one at the top, we've clearly detected, it's a nice friendly box drawn around the fire. And the second one, we've got a golden eagle. So at the moment, California's in the middle of their fire season, but occasionally we get cute things like up on the towers where the cameras are mounted, we occasionally get nice photos of the local wildlife. But fortunately, in this case, we haven't detected the eagle as a fire. We've detected something hazy off to the right. So this is where the kind of the technical magic is happening on the back end. But on the front end, there's a place where you can receive notifications. The other thing that's happening at the moment is because we are just hitting our public release cycle, then any screenshot I take on any given day has become obsolete or out of date because we're making tweaks and updates so fast. So this is a screenshot from about a week ago, and the detections will look slightly different today. But you can see you get notification that there's a fire, you get a sequence of images. But then also we have a user interface. So again, this is a pre-release version with tweaks every, I think we're doing weekly release cycles, so it's not really tweaks every day. But what you see on the left is a list of the current detections, and on the right in the big panel, you see a map of where those detections are. So there's some functionality that you can zoom in on a particular detection and view images. So you see on this left panel now, there's a camera image. So you actually be able to see the exact image from the camera that's made the detection. And you can scroll backwards and forwards in time. And we have cameras that turn around. So what you don't see here is the overlays of the satellite data. But that's what the product is currently looking like. But there's lots of opportunities in Queensland. This is not the only cool thing that's happening. So I was thinking about this on my commute to work. And just for reference, because my car is in the shop this week, my commute to work currently consists of a walk along the beach. So this photo is legitimately from my commute on Wednesday morning. And I think this is part of the reason why I stayed in Queensland. And it's part of the reason why I love the opportunity to not just work for cool companies in the bigger cities, but also be allowed to work for cooler companies and stay on the Sunshine Coast. Like we're pretty lucky here. There's some cool stuff going on and there's some cool places to sit and do it. So this is literally just a tiny sample of cool local companies for which I have some kind of experience or some kind of story. One of the early incarnations of the company that's now called BRE, I remember seeing when I was in my undergraduate, I saw someone give a presentation about some application of mathematics to something like railway scheduling. And it literally blew my mind. It was the first time I'd seen something so impressive that was such a practical application of the mathematics that I had been studying. It's like, this is what I want to do. And so that company later turned into BRE. And I have done a couple of small projects with them. They're a great bunch of people doing some extremely cool math in the logistics and scheduling and all sorts of spaces. And I'm always impressed when I see them pop up in the news. Black Book are fun because they do, every time you think about some task that you do or some task that you've delegated that is repetitive and clicky and just requires attention to detail, and you think, surely in 2020, a robot could be doing this. Black Book are the company that's doing that for you. So they do, a majority of their business is in a field called robotic process automation. So when you have something that is repetitive and clicky and that you think a little robot could do that better than a human, these are the people to call. Canaria Technologies are upcoming new tech company. They have a wearable sensor and the data feeds that you get off that. So it detects a bunch of, I'm going to use the wrong word. I was going to say biometrics. I don't think that's the right word. They do it's got a PPG on it. So you get a bunch of heart rate and you can compute a whole bunch of things. It's like a wearable ECG. And they're using that out in harsh working environments like mining to detect heat exhaustion and fatigue. So it's a really cool safety thing that's coming up. So there's Fireball, who I work for. There's also Grabber Technology, which is another company I have a fun relationship with because they have summer interns through the UQ School of Math and Physics internship program. And I'm lucky enough to be able to supervise some of those interns. And they do cool things like biometrics, like biometric identification, super cool. But the company Grabber itself do everything from manufacturing the silicon chips to building the casing for whatever module they're building, to developing the software that does the machine learning that knits the whole thing together. It's really exciting. And yeah, every summer I get to do something fun with them. But you don't have to just work for local companies. You can work for international companies. I mentioned that my previous job was with an American employer. This particular team photo is the Fireball team because we're about half of us in Queensland and half of us in the Western United States. And the photo on the left is my workstation during quarantine, which at times I confess there may have been some early afternoon drinking because it was actually, so remote work, as much as quarantine has helped us all understand how we can do remote work, it's not always great. And I think the difference between my previous job where I came on board to a company that already had like some central offices and a few remote workers compared to coming on at Fireball and closing the office about 6 weeks after I'd arrived and putting on an entire team remotely. The challenge was that if only one of you has to adjust at a time to being remote, then the other people can show you the way. But if an entire business has to adjust all of a sudden, then it's a massive challenge. And I think the other big part of the challenge that I faced with my new team after starting at the beginning of the year was a lot of them hadn't met face to face when they started. So we had to start our working relationships in a very busy startup with lots of pressure. We had to start it over some weird, laggy virtual meeting where you lose all of the, well, you don't lose all of the visual clues, but you lose a lot of them. And then you get that weird laggy delay. So there's lots of awkward conversation starts. And, you know, when you get a bunch of tech people who possibly aren't the greatest people at reading nonverbal cues in the first place, and you introduce them to a new high pressure team under some weird laggy virtual environment, like it's a recipe for some hard times. So I would rather not have done it that way. But like I acknowledged at the beginning of the presentation, they're a magical team that have produced a whole lot of really excellent work, and I'm super happy every day when I come in and see them. Oh, because of course we've opened the office now, and some days they actually come in. And when I look to the future and I think about, like, what are the roles, not just for me and my future, but what are the roles for the young people coming through? And I can tell you, these are some of the roles I'm looking for right now. And some of them I would have heard of when I was in my undergraduate, like software engineers, we knew about those. Remote sensing, that was probably something we knew about back in the day. But machine learning engineers, 20 years ago, we weren't asking for those. We didn't know that was a thing we wanted. Data science wasn't actually, when I was in my undergraduate, data science was not a term that anyone had started using yet. And just like we look at DevOps and cloud ops now, like we used to have to worry about server rooms in our office building, and now we worry about virtual machines through some dashboard on some cloud console. And these are things that have come up really recently. So how do we know what's coming in the future? Well, we don't, but it's probably going to be a bunch of techie stuff. Like none of these computers or phones are going away. They're all just going to evolve. None of the things that we do now are they're not going to change drastically overnight. Everything's going to change subtly. And so when I think about what's in the future, one of my best ways to gauge what's in the future, I look a little bit back at what it was like when I was doing my undergraduate and how much it's changed over that timeline. You know, like artificial intelligence was a thing that we knew about. It's like this big general thing, like everyone's going to have a robot, or robots are going to replace people. And sci-fi is a really great place to look for analogies for this. And one of my favorite things is to go and read sci-fi books that are 50 years old, but are still set 50 or 100 years in the future. And look at, if I'm halfway along the timeline of when that book was actually written to when it was set, and look at like, what's the convergence and divergence between what that author had been thinking. And then I do the same thing for my career. Like the book analogy I have is I read The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert Heinlein. And that's a lovely book, I highly recommend it. But there's a moon colony, there's a penal colony on the moon. And they have some general intelligence that they can communicate with that kind of runs the community. But in order to communicate and have a conversation with this general artificial intelligence, you actually go to a wall unit and pick up a telephone with a cord. So 50 years ago, the author clearly had no idea that those cords were going to be completely obsolete. Or that we were going to be so far away from an actual general intelligence that we could just have any kind of conversation with. And so then over the course of my career, I look back at what were these things, well, what have these things traditionally been? So to me, like I said before, data science, when I look under the hood, it is all statistics, calculus, and linear algebra. So I'm going to leave you with this analogy. And then open the floor to questions.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Now, I'm sure someone's going to pick up on the on the analogy and come back with a question at some point. But fantastic presentation, and a really great way to sort of understand where you've come from in your journey. You know, one of the things that we are really keen to try and help promote with as part of the Queensland AI Hub is opportunities and jobs in Queensland, but also, you know, potentially you have lived in a big city, and maybe you can just elaborate a little bit further as to where you see the advantage to working like in a more regional area, and what opportunities that provides to you, and maybe what protections it also provides to you as an employee.
I think living in a regional area is a lifestyle choice. Like in my 20s, I wouldn't have chosen it. And I know people in their 20s who find the Sunshine Coast doesn't have enough nightclubs, and that's totally fine. Like I spent a big chunk of that period of my life in Brunswick, in Melbourne, in Brunswick and Fitzroy, going to clubs. And then I got it out of my system, and now I live here for the lifestyle. I like that it's quiet. Although, you know, for people who are more outdoorsy, maybe having a surf before work is the most important thing for them. So I think choosing regional areas, like that's a really personal choice. And I think it's not for us to ask what's the protection in doing it. It's like, what's the disadvantage? There is literally no disadvantage now. Like I'm in the same time zone most of the year as the entire East Coast. And for the part of the year that they choose to do daylight savings, they're only an hour out from me. So there is no difference of me taking this call from the Region Digital Hub than it is for me taking this call from Sydney. Except this year, if I was doing it from Sydney, I'd be locked up in my tiny apartment, or I'd be catching public transport and running the risk of catching that silly disease. So actually, maybe the protection for me at the moment is that out in this regional area, we've got a much lower community transmission rate.
Yeah.
But I think the important things about what we've learned through technology and through, you know, this year in particular, is that being regional is a choice that you're allowed to make, because it doesn't hold you back from engaging with whatever company, wherever that company might be. And then the other part that's kind of interesting for me, being here in particular, is there's a very funky tech community here that the Region Digital Hub, the community precedes the Digital Hub. In fact, the Digital Hub is a result of people within the tech community here making submissions to the local government and getting this thing built. And now it's become like the centre of where that community can gravitate towards. And so it's basically places like this facilitate the regeneration of the community. But these sort of communities, they're not isolated to here. I'm sure the Gold Coast has got something cool happening as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, Advanced Queensland do a lot of work all over the state, you know, standing up different innovation hubs and technology hubs. So
we had some, we had some visitors from AWS. They came up. I think they've been recently based out of Brisbane, because I don't think they could have come in if they were based out of Sydney. But the question was put to them, you know, what other innovation hubs do they see like the one in region? And they said it's more like the different regions give rise to different businesses. So more agricultural areas will be giving rise to ag tech businesses. Because although you see some cool ag tech stuff coming out of the universities in Brisbane, a lot of the development and a lot of the customers and finding that market fit, that's got to go and happen and out in the region where the work is happening. And so, you know, each of these different regions that has its different needs, all it needs is a seed of some technology innovation from within that community to start building out that business. And yeah, then through Queensland government initiatives, there might be a way to connect with those people, or connect with more people that can facilitate those sorts of developments.
Yeah, awesome. There's just a quick question. What was the book that you referenced?
It's called The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert Heinlein.
Excellent. Have you got the ISBN number? Or?
You know what? I will give it to Sonia as one of the after presentation reading or viewing things you can do. You can't view it. You
I'm
can read it.
surprised you haven't got it off the top of your head, Ruth. But
I'm not eidetic.
so just look, just following on with from some of you know the things that you've talked about tonight or today, you know, do you think there's a need for people to learn and upskill in AI?
Yes. I mean, not AI. Like, don't upskill in AI. Upskill in whatever it is that you're doing. So, for example, if you're in a business that has lots of clicky, repetitive tasks, then go find out what robotic process automation is and go find one of the tools that does it and you start doing it for your business. If you're in a business that has like ridiculous rostering problems because, I don't know, you work in a fast food outlet and it's all shift workers, or you work in a hospital and it's all shift workers, then go find out a smarter, high-tech, algorithmic way of doing that if you want to. I mean, you should everyone should upskill. Why would you stop learning? And you just got to find what it is inside your current interest area or your current niche that's a nexus with, you know, maybe the latest, hottest technology, or maybe future directions in technology. But you don't have to call it AI. I clearly have a bone to pick with AI being this cool new term for everything.
That's the Ruth I love to hear of it. So one of the things that, look, and obviously we want people to keep sending the questions in is, you know, Ruth is very happy to share her opinion, and you know, it's a learned opinion, so there's obviously some basis behind it. So, you know, feel free to send some curly questions her way as well. But you know, you did mention through the course of the presentation about the jobs you're looking at right now. Mm-hmm. So you know, what's the process that you go through looking? You know, you're part of your regional organisation. You're across a couple of different countries. What's your process that you're looking at employing, and how can we encourage, you know, people from not just regional Queensland, but Queensland in general to sort of look out for those types of opportunities?
All right, so let me tell you about how I got the 5 people I've currently got, because I think this is truly illustrative of how it's going to map out. So I came on board in February, and since February I've put on 5 or 6 people, I don't know. It's always be hiring. So I had done a presentation at the local meetup group here in the hub, and one of the guys who I've known through the community who works for another local business was like, do you need a cloud guy? I was like, yes. So that was my first hire, was just someone I knew in the community who happened to hear me talk. Then I posted an ad on Seek. And so that ad, it got me a really interesting array of applicants, and a bunch of them were not just local to Queensland, but a bunch of them were actually local to the Sunshine Coast. And so I put on a couple of those guys. But I also sent this job ad out to my personal network. And so another one of the guys that I put on was because someone that I have an academic relationship with, he rang and said, there's this guy who's in between his master's degree and his PhD. He'd be great for you guys. You can't have him forever though, give him a call. So that was a recommendation through my personal network. I've had, when I give presentations like this, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Like I don't publicize, like I don't do social media, and I don't do, like I have business cards, but I absolutely never carry them with me. But if you have some of these skills, or you are interested for yourself or one of your colleagues in what Fireball is doing, reach out on LinkedIn, because I gave a presentation to a bunch of postgrads or postdocs, again at UQ, and someone just reached out and said, oh, you know, your presentation was really interesting. Can you help me? Like, I don't know, I think I reviewed the guy's resume, and I reached out to him about 6 months later. I said, are you looking for work? Because he had the right sort of skill set. Because at the time when I asked him, because his background is in physics, he was like, oh, I'm interested to get into data science and machine learning, but I haven't done much work in that area. I might actually feel like I'm qualified for that sort of thing in another 6 months. So 6 months had passed and I went back and reached out to him. So that was someone I had met through LinkedIn. So there you go. I got 2 of them from my CCAD. I got 1 through my personal. The other 3 are basically through presentations like this, but someone I knew in my personal network locally, a connection of my personal network, and then someone reaching out to me directly through LinkedIn after having seen something they thought was interesting about Fireball.
Awesome. Awesome. So we've got a question from Jackie about should software engineers learn data science, or should people specialize in this?
I actually need software engineers who don't want to be on my data science team. Software engineer is no longer some general, oh, they've done computer science or they've done software, now they could do anything. Like, we are now so subspecialized. It's kind of like medicine. Like, you don't just go to a doctor and go, oh, can you fix my foot, and then fix this lump I have in my neck, and then my skin cancer, and then do my heart surgery. Like, these are all different specializations. And so now we're having that problem with, not a problem, we're having that differentiation within software. So, I mean, all of those roles are software in some sense, and some of them are more mathy, and some of them are more like managing servers and deployments, and some of them are more, what is the best messaging infrastructure for, like, what's the best way to get images from a camera in Nevada into my computer system so that the machine learning model that my machine learning team is building can go do smoke detection on it. And then what's the best way to send emails out? Like, there's a software architecture problem there that's completely different. And I don't want someone who's building that software architecture and making that, you know, stable and well tested. I don't want the same person who's doing that to also be under pressure to write the machine learning model. They're separate specializations, and you can go between these 2 teams. I can rotate you, but they're quite distinct skill sets. And I don't think there's any, I mean, I don't think there's any point like pigeonholing yourself and going, well, I only do this one thing. But keep in mind, there's like a whole rainbow of things you can do. And I think it also leads back into, you know, what do you learn next? So it's like, well, if you've been working on a team as the software architect or as the DevOps guy, but what you really want to do is you want to get on the deep learning team, then start doing training for the deep learning team, and then come back to your employer and go, I did this course, I did some Kaggle competitions, now can I have a 6-month shot on the deep learning team? Or vice versa. I mean, this is what happens to me all the time. Like, I've got a tiny team and some of these skills are not duplicated in my team. So guess who then has to be the one that has to go and learn how to do cloud ops? Because if my cloud guy ever needs to take a holiday, then I'm probably going to have to be watching the system while he's away.
Yeah, that's,
so,
I think that's, it sort of touches on a topic that we really do like to try and express to people around the ecosystem that sits around the data scientist to actually make these things work. And I guess that you're potentially a functional business, you know, so what's that ecosystem look like, and why is it important to have those variables within the team to have those different specialties? So I think that's probably a whole other conversation around what does that look like and why do we need it. Now, there was a question earlier on, Ruth, about who are your customers? So that, you know, they're talking about, is it QFES or LA Fire? Who are your early adopters of your technology?
Yes, CAL FIRE. Yes, SoCal Edison. So emergency response, as you can imagine, like fire and emergency services, some utility companies. So I think you probably recognize that the fires, some of the most, I guess, well-publicized fires in California tend to be when a power line goes down. So companies like PG&E in California they invest in technologies like this and become our early adopters, because for them it's like early detection saves lives. It also protects their infrastructure. And here in Australia, there's local councils, QFES, as well as utility companies like telecommunications providers and power providers that are interested in being a part of this for protecting the community, but also for protecting infrastructure. Another interesting customer, I'm sure we've all seen the endless plantation forests between Brisbane and the Sunshine Coast. So it turns out that they have a particular interest because with surprisingly high frequency, cars are abandoned and set on fire inside the plantation forest. Mm-hmm. So the earlier you can spot that, the less damage to your assets that you take. So there's another customer. It's been quite interesting to look at who that range of public and private customers are.
And that's really interesting, I guess, and it probably a point that I'd like you to have a bit of a thought and express your opinion on is, you know, how do you encourage other industries to adopt and develop this type of technology? You know, like obviously what you're doing is fire detection, and the fact that your technology can have an impact on the cost of the building industry through the loss of, you know, assets like forests and that sort of thing. How do you see what you're doing as a tool or a means to encourage and show other industries and organisations how to utilise the technology and adopt what you do to promote and grow their businesses? Well, given that you've come out of oil, you've come out of oil and gas, so you know you had an industry there that's obviously very profit driven.
Also, well, I mean, one of the motivations for my move out of oil and gas and into bushfire detection, apart from the fact that it meant I got to stay here, was when I go home at Christmas and tell my hippie parents about the work that I do. It's much more pleasing to the family that I come home and be doing bushfire detection, because my dad was a CFS volunteer for like my entire life up until he retired a couple of years ago. So that's what motivates me. I think it's okay for young people to be motivated by money if that's their thing, but you also see lots of people in their careers are totally motivated by meaningful work. Insofar as getting people to adopt our technology, I mean, it's a little bit business development, so it's a little bit out of my field of things I enjoy doing. I like working on cool tech. That's why the oil and gas company was fine with me until I had something better to do, because it's the cool tech for me. It's the cool tech, it's a nice team, it's constant challenges. But it was nice for me to move into an industry that's, you know, more meaningful, because it's once you're technically satisfied, once you're financially satisfied, then you start looking for meaning, right? We're talking about the top of Maslow's hierarchy. But people who want to adopt bushfire detection,
well, probably not so much bushfire detection as such, but the use of technology and how you're using it to help, you know, grow a business that in an area that, you know, like customers that you might not naturally think of as being part of your traditional business model.
Are you talking about business development still?
Well, no, I'm talking about how you're using the technology. Well, it is business development, but how are you using the technology to actually demonstrate to other businesses what it is that the technology can do outside of the norm?
I mean, you're right. I think there's a broader thing there of, I mean, there's two ways to think about it. There's like people thinking about what's happening in their industry and which parts of that could be innovated through technology. And then there's people saying maybe like what we've taken sensors on satellites and on cameras and we've applied them to something. I mean, we can use satellites and cameras for a bunch of different things. You know, CCTV cameras are used everywhere for, you know, watching people. We just happen to be using ours for watching trees and looking for smoke. And so, maybe it is just through the promotion and the demonstration of, oh, hey, we've got sensors, they could do this, that people might come up with their own ideas. I think the satellite one's an interesting one, because the reason that we look at geostationary satellites looking down on the Earth for hotspots is because the research group that we're affiliated with at UC Berkeley, they had satellites that they were pointing out at the universe to look for supernova and to look for indicators of the expansion of the universe. And it was that research group that went, hang on, if we turn these around and look at the Earth and we use the same sort of spectral bands, we can actually analyze and detect for hotspots that relate to fires. So, our company is already a case of something a little bit non-practical in research turned into something super practical and super meaningful. Not to say anything against looking for the evidence of the expansion of the universe. I'm all for astrophysics. It's just I come from a background of applied maths, so the astrophysicists are a little bit smarter than me.
Well, we won't go down that path, but just another question here is if you're just focused on the problems you're assigned, such as spotting and preventing the fire, or bigger issues such as fire management for environmental health?
So if you're talking about fuel load management, I guess the bigger program of how you manage bushfire risk is managing fuel load and fuel assessment, which might be through land management, back burning, things I am no expert on, so will not profess to know any exhaustive list. Then the early detection, which is the bit that I'm currently focused on, and then like the mapping of bushfires and the observation of fires so that when they are happening, you can interact with the people who are currently doing the emergency response and help give them real-time information. So what I can say to that about Fireball is that we're involved with the Bushfire Frontier Development Lab. There's a data quest that's happening right now, and I'm the tech lead on one of the teams for that. And they're working on the early detection problem, but the Bushfire data quest actually has 3 projects. One is the fuel load assessment, and it's only through assessment of fuel load that you can then find areas to target your management of. One is the detection team, which is the team I'm involved with, and the other one is predictive modelling for bushfires. And I can speak to the future plans of Fireball because we have a branch that already does sensors and flights over bushfires, because our co-founder in America has also been a firefighter for many years. So because we already have the sensor tech for monitoring fires in real time, then one of the future products that we'll be building into is predictive modelling. And through the user interface that I showed you, at some point, we'll have integrated that real-time monitoring into an interface like that so that you can, as an emergency responder, have access to real-time mapping of fires. Because there are certainly examples of, where the delay in information about the fire or the weather conditions has caused people to go down the wrong road and meet a very untimely death.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not good when that happens.
It's a terrifying business, this firefighting.
Mm. So just a couple more questions here. That do you have any issues of privacy as a result of the use of satellite data in monitoring forests, especially if they're close to settlements? If not, are there any privacy concerns to consider in your line of work?
So I wouldn't worry about what the satellite can see, because the satellite pixel density, like, it's not an optical sensor, it's like infrared and near infrared band, so you can't make out people. And the pixel density, I think each pixel is like, I'm going to say 500 by 500 meters. So that's the satellites. Don't worry about what the satellites can see, because they're not military grade satellites. We can't see you. I would worry about what the cameras can see. Now, our cameras, the network that we use in the States, where there are settlements, all the parts of the settlements are pixelated. So you have a camera looking, you get a pixelated section. So that's what we're currently doing for privacy. I mean, look, if you do drive down a road that's in front of one of these cameras and the road isn't pixelated, then you driving down that road will be caught on that camera. But as they're taking static images, I acknowledge privacy concerns that people might have, in as much as, you know, when I walk through the background of someone taking a geotagged photo on their phone and I'm caught on their phone and I'm geotagged, that irritates me when they post that to Facebook, because that's, you know, that's a privacy concern. When I walk down the streets of Brisbane and I'm caught by your CCTV cameras, that irritates me because that's a privacy concern. So sure, it's a concern. I think it's our, you know, I don't want to pass judgment either way, because I think it's outside of the scope of my role.
Yeah, okay. So another question here, how much AWS or Microsoft Azure AI technologies would you use and build upon versus building your own machine learning technologies?
We're building our own models, but our cloud stuff, all our microservices and stuff, our databases are currently hosted on AWS.
Cool. And
we don't touch Microsoft.
I'm not going there.
I mean, no, actually that's unfair, because they did buy GitHub and we use that, and they do maintain Visual Studio Code and we use that. So let's give credit where credit's due. We just don't use their Office products.
Okay. And,
or their cloud products.
Yeah. Now, just another question. Have you, and this probably is outside your realm as well, but you may be aware, have you raised any VC, and what was the path like? Venture capital.
I keep my head down and my eyes on the tech. I don't remember I left accounting 10 years ago.
Yeah. Okay.
I can read a balance sheet if I have to, but don't make me do it. And the other thing is, I hate doing sales. I absolutely do not want to have to get up and pitch to some guy who's listened to 100 other people today. That stuff doesn't interest me. I do know that a bunch of the funding, because this started as a research prototype, I know that a bunch of the funding for this is from commercialization of research funding. And I also know that there's a consortium of organisations that were investing in bushfire technology that have also contributed a lot to the funding for this project.
Yeah.
This business.
I
know that the only reason that the sales pipeline slowed down is because our business development guys can't get face-to-face with people at the moment, but it hasn't slowed them down much. There are a lot of people who are ready to sign their checkbook, and I've just got to get this product ready to deliver. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. Well, we're nearly out of time, but, is there any final thoughts that you would like to share around, I guess, encouraging people to head down this path if they're not already there, and, maybe where you see yourself going in the near future? I know 5 years is a long time, but, what's the near future look like for Dr. Ruth Luscombe?
So actually the near future, the 5-year horizon, has become more clear for me the further I go along and now drift away from actually doing math research. What's happened since I made the transition to data science is I've ended up leading technical teams. So my previous team was a team of just data scientists. My current team is the team that's building the architecture, the cloud infrastructure, and doing the data science. So it's a bit more of a broad scope. And so what I see for myself is perhaps progressing up to roles that sound like CTO, because it seems that my career is taking more of a management track, and I enjoy it. I enjoy the pressure, I enjoy the challenges, I enjoy trying to get the best out of people. And I think other people who have technical careers I mean, there's two main tracks, and it's evident in a lot of the older tech companies that, you know, you take on your early career engineers, and then after time they start to split into two tracks, and one tends to be the management track and the other one tends to be like this, the engineering fellow, and they're the people that stay, you know, really on the tools and innovating really hard, or you know, just sticking with, you know, like I said, staying on the tools. So I think I'm taking that management track. And I think for other people, you know, if you're starting your tech career, just the technology will change. Just learn things that you think are interesting and marketable. You know, maybe ease off on the front end engineers, because I keep getting approaches from front end engineers at the moment, and my front end team is actually in the States, so I'm finding it really hard to justify putting one on locally. So yeah, think about things that are marketable. Think about things that you also enjoy, right? So if front end is the one thing that tickles your fancy, then stick with it. There will always be jobs. But yeah, I think for people who are earlier on the track of their technical career or considering a switch, like, just keep in mind that technical careers will constantly evolve. You'll constantly have to learn the newest tech. Better things will come out. Your current skills that you're educated with will become obsolete. And also understand that if you enjoy the challenges of managing the humans, then maybe a management track's for you.
Awesome, Ruth. Well, we are out of time, but thank you very much for your presentation today and your thoughts. And look, if there's anyone out there that wants to get in touch regarding the jobs, obviously they can contact us through the hub, or, you know, direct to Fireball, and we'll put you in touch with those. So thank you again. As always, it's always great fun to be involved with you. So we look forward to having Ruth around in the future at different events. And again, thanks for your time today.
No